Dear Martha, I have no doubt in my mind that you will watch this video, so I figured I would start out by addressing you directly. This will be the last time that I plan to ever mention your name, or give any amount of energy to you or the harm that you have caused, publicly or privately. After this, I will be moving on with my life for good, and that is a life that you are aware no longer includes you. If somehow you are still confused as to why that is the case, which I don't know how in the world that could be, but if you are still confused, hopefully this video will clear up any questions you have about that. Over the years, you have tried to silence this story, my story, and continued to hide behind a wall of manipulation built by your grandiose narcissism that left me struggling to find a voice for years. You've twisted the truth time and time again, and you have done your very best to keep me isolated and voiceless. You have turned people who were once family against me in an effort to maintain acceptance and approval from your peers. You have gaslit everyone within earshot in order to try to maintain some sort of control over what is the real reality of this situation. But today, I am finally putting my foot down. Today, I am finally ready to talk about everything. And yes, Martha, I do mean everything. You can no longer silence me. You don't get to control any part of my life or my truth anymore. I am finally speaking up, and this time, Martha, I promise you, I will be heard. What's up, Rebels? My name is Leo, and I am one half of Leo and Willy. If you couldn't tell by the title of this video or that very direct introduction, today I am going to be talking about my narcissistic parent and how things escalated to the point where my mother is no longer a part of my life at all. Now, if you're not new here, you may have seen some previous videos from myself and from Willy discussing parts of this situation, sort of during the climax of a lot of what was going on. But it has been officially a year since I posted that first video discussing all of this, and I figured now is as good a time as ever to put an end to this saga and give you guys a sort of summary of what has happened and where we are now. Now, before we get into everything, I do want to give you guys some trigger warnings just so that you can be informed going into this video. So throughout this video, I will be discussing narcissistic abuse that I sustained from my parent. This will include mentions of verbal abuse, emotional abuse and manipulation, mentions of themes related to SA, and just a lot of generally distressing situations and themes overall. If these are things that may trigger you, or if you are in any way just not in the headspace to listen to a story like this today, please do protect your peace. You can go and check out any other video that we have put out that's a lot lighter. There are plenty on our channel. Please don't sit through this if it's not the right time for you. I appreciate you for being here, and please protect your mental well-being. Alright, so without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? So yes, my mother is a narcissist. This is something that I didn't always have the ability to understand, and it wasn't until relatively recently that I was able to identify and accept this as truth. And this was done with the support of my partner Willy, some close friends, and also the help of licensed professionals. One of the reasons why I didn't see the issues or the unhealthiness in the way that my mom and I interacted and how she treated me was because I honestly had no frame of reference as to how a parent should be treating their child or how that dynamic should be going. And even in times when I did feel like something was off or things just weren't right, I didn't think that I had the ability to say or do anything about it. It was just sort of the way things were. I was sort of instinctively embarrassed by the dynamic that my mom and I had, and because of this, I often kept my relationship with my mother separate from the rest of my life with everyone else. As a result, I ended up hiding a lot of the abusive tendencies that my mom had and how that affected me as a child growing up. There was a lot of verbal abuse in my home when I was growing up, and what that looked like for me was basically conflict was never dealt with in a healthy way, and emotions were also never communicated in a healthy way. There was a lot of shouting and a lot of anger in our home, and I want to be clear because I've gotten some backlash from people in my life who are no longer in my life about this particular fact. I understand that at times parents raise their voices at their kids. I'm sure that there are many people watching this right now who can think of a time when their parent yelled at them for doing something wrong that they shouldn't have been doing. But where things shifted from a normal level of discipline to an unhealthy display of anger was in the fact that there weren't really any sort of levels or any range of anger that was dealt out depending on what crime was committed, so to speak. Whether I didn't do my homework or stole her car, the response that I got in terms of anger was the same. And this response was hours upon hours of prolonged screaming, broken up by intermittent times of giving me the silent treatment, which would then be broken up by more screaming. This cycle was something that would just kind of continue on a loop until Martha decided that she had run out of steam or gotten out every bit of anger that she had towards me at that time. Now again, I understand that parents need to discipline their children, and sometimes you raise your voice at your kid. But the truth is, the thing that I remember most about my entire childhood is my mom yelling at me. Even though 98% of the time, I likely could not tell you what it was that made her angry in the first place. Now, growing up, it was just me and my mom, so I didn't have anyone to A, advocate for me or step in and interrupt or sort of try to mediate the situation, or B, anyone to teach me that this wasn't okay or normal behavior and I didn't have to deal with it in this way. So because I didn't know any better and I didn't have anyone that told me any better, I just accepted this as the way that life was. And that is how life continued to be even after I graduated high school, moved to the UK, and started my life in London. Despite the ocean between us, Martha maintained a tight grip on my life through her emotional manipulation and controlling nature. We didn't have any sort of boundaries when it came to how much communication I was able to give to her, how often she could try to contact me while I was trying to live my life as a first-year university student in another country, gaining my own independence, and so on. She even tracked my location using Find My iPhone, which she did by sort of guilt-tripping me into not feeling like I could disagree or say no to that being a thing. If I ever tried to bring this up or say that I had any sort of issue with her doing things like tracking my location, she would go into a sort of emotional rant about how she's always anxious that I'm safe and that I'm so far away from her, so she uses the location tracking and things along that line to sort of make sure that I'm okay. She also had a habit of messaging me a lot and like kind of blowing up my phone, and if I wasn't responding to her, she would start calling me repeatedly. So if I were to bring up my uncomfortability with my location being monitored by her, she would sort of frame it as, well, because you don't answer my messages and my phone calls every time, this is something that I need in order to know that if you're ignoring me, then I still know that you're safe. There's a lot wrong with this situation, just off the bat on its own. I don't think I should have ever been made to feel guilty for wanting privacy or wanting to sort of assert my autonomy and my ability to say, hey, don't look at every move I make, please. That kind of makes me feel uncomfortable. I will say that guilt is something that Martha used constantly to sort of keep her control on me. She was very emotionally manipulative, so she had a really good way of saying things and making me feel bad and making me feel like I had an obligation to agree or go along with whatever it was, despite me having an issue with it because it was causing her pain, it was causing her emotional distress, and so on. Overall, I really just felt like I had no say or any sort of control over the dynamic that my mother and I had in our relationship. You know, I didn't have my own independence. I didn't feel like I was really my own person within this relationship. So I never really felt like I had the authority or the right to voice how I felt about it all. Like I said, she would constantly make me feel guilty for the way that I felt if I ever didn't align with what she wanted. And that resulted in a lot of guilt that I carried around with me for a very long time. And it took a lot of trying, a lot of effort, and a lot of soul searching to sort of be able to let go of a lot of that guilt that she put onto me. But again, this was just our dynamic. This is what I had always known, and I didn't have any point of reference, like I said. I didn't have anyone telling me, hey, this isn't normal, this isn't really okay. Because I also kept a lot of this private. My relationship with my mother was mine and hers, and I did my best throughout the years to keep it that way. I mean, who wants to speak poorly about their own parent, especially if they aren't feeling like they're in a place where they can fully understand and identify the issues with their relationship and the unhealthiness of that dynamic. It's just not something that you ever want to do. Alright, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to February of 2022. This is when Willy and I first started dating officially. If you don't know the story of how we met and how we got together, we actually have a story time video here on our channel that you can go and check out. It's really sweet, it's really fun. We talk about just how that all went down, so feel free to go and check that out if you haven't seen it already. Now, because of the relationship and the dynamic that my mother and I had learned from a pretty early age how to keep a pretty solid line of separation between my mother and the rest of my life. And this only deepened as I came to understand my queer identity. As many of you may know, being in the closet kind of forces you to hide a lot about yourself, to sort of keep your secret from the people that you don't want to come out to or don't feel like you can come out to. And this fear and this sort of need to hide who I was ultimately extended to hiding the budding relationship that I had with my partner, Willy. Now, that's not to say that I never mentioned Willy, but whenever I did, I would frame our relationship to my mother as just us being friends and nothing more. This undoubtedly put a lot of unnecessary stress and tension into Willy and I's relationship that just ultimately was not healthy at all. You know, it's not fun to hide an entire relationship from your parent, or in Willy's perspective, it's also not very fun to have to hide your relationship from your partner's parent. Looking back, I can definitely say that I am not proud of the way that I went about all of this. I wish that I had been a lot more open about our relationship sooner because it just wasn't fair. And ultimately, I was holding us back from happiness in order to avoid a reality that in the end became unavoidable. I really wish that I had prioritized Willy and our relationship over this woman a lot sooner than I did. And I feel like as I continue to get into the story, you guys will continue to understand more and more why that is. Now, jumping ahead all the way to May of 2023, Martha came to visit. By this point, Willy and I had been in a relationship for over a year, but I was hiding this relationship from my mother because I was terrified of coming out to her or in any way discussing anything to do with my queerness. So despite the trip overall having its good moments and us being able to sort of, have good times together, I was ultimately extremely anxious and just in my head every time that I was with my mom during this visit. And that was because I was hiding a very, very big part of my life from her. And I didn't know how to navigate that, especially when she was literally in the same city or we were on the same continent or things like that, where it was much more prevalent that this was a secret that I was having to hide. This situation also undoubtedly had a really big negative impact on Willy and I's relationship. To give you guys some context, Martha came to visit for a literal month. That meant that Willy and I were hiding our relationship and ultimately were not able to interact or be in each other's presence or just exist as ourselves for an entire month. It was draining, to say the absolute least. After that visit, Willy sat me down and opened up to me about how all of this had been affecting her personally. After we discussed everything to do with the situation, it was very clear that this couldn't continue on the way that it was. I had to come clean. Now, as I said before, I am not proud of the way that I went about this entire situation, so I'm not about to sit here and say that what I'm about to describe is how anyone should approach a situation in any way similar to this. I'm just telling y'all what happened the way it happened. So initially, I thought that I would try to soften the blow of the reality of things by telling Martha that Willy and I had just recently started dating and not that we had been together for a year already. What was her response, you might ask? Well, she was extremely angry. As we have come to kind of understand, she has a habit of being. She began her routine of shouting at me, making me feel guilty for everything to do with the situation, crying at me, and just being extremely angry and escalating the situation to a very, very heightened and emotional state. But amongst all of the shouting and the hysterics, there were essentially two issues that Martha had with all of this, which were, why didn't you tell me the truth about all of this? And why did you lie to me about it instead? Now, these questions, I will say, are very valid. I think if I had been someone in her shoes, if the situation were reversed, I would likely have the same questions in my head as well. However, the way that she went about expressing them was not okay, and it was not a healthy situation in any way whatsoever. I gave her the most honest answer that I could, and that was to tell her that I was extremely anxious to talk to her about anything to do with my queerness, including my relationship with a woman. However, Martha didn't really know how to accept this as the truth, or this wasn't maybe the truth that she wanted to hear. So instead of being able to sort of accept this and take some time to process it, instead we got locked into a back and forth of her shouting and me apologizing for essentially being uncomfortable and afraid to come out to her, and then her shouting at me more for feeling that way. And I will say that throughout this, despite me giving her this explanation and trying to explain to her that I felt very vulnerable and unsafe to talk to her about my queerness, because previously I had come out to her a couple of times, first as bisexual and the second as non-binary. And while the first coming out went relatively okay, in the second one, she said some things that were very hurtful to me and left me feeling very anxious about talking to her about anything to do with my queerness moving forward from that. So this cycle continued, and this phone call went on for literally hours. And like I said, it consisted of Martha shouting at me, saying how upset she was, questioning why I had done this to her, and me sobbing, attempting to give her the same explanation, trying to apologize, and ultimately just having to say the same things over and over, hoping that it would get through to her. Of course, nothing got resolved from this phone conversation. It ended really abruptly, I would say. I think just sort of it needed to end because it was going nowhere. And from this point, every conversation that we had after this was essentially the same. No matter how many times I apologized or however many different types of ways I tried to explain my perspective in all of this and why I had gone about things the way that I had, there was ultimately nothing that I could say or do that was going to get through to her. So we were basically just constantly in conflict with each other anytime we had communication. And ultimately, Martha was just constantly refusing to listen to anything that I or even Willy had to say on anything to do with the situation. In fact, Martha literally refused to speak to Willy in any context. On multiple occasions, she literally hung up the phone at the slightest indication that she could hear Willy's voice because she just refused to listen to or speak to her at all. You see, because Martha is a narcissist and she has a habit of deflecting blame onto literally anything and anyone else other than herself, she had decided to create this narrative in her head that Willy was someone who was just like out to get her or was out to steal her child away from her. I just want to say that this sort of thinking is very emotionally incestuous and just not healthy in any regard whatsoever. Never mind the fact that it was all BS, because the issues that Martha and I had were issues that we had between each other. They weren't anything to do with my partner or anything that my partner had said or done with me to try to in any way like frame my mom out to be someone else than what she was. This was just me standing up and learning how to be independent and speak up for myself against this person who had been bullying me for my entire life. The real truth of the situation is that Martha was constantly wanting to keep me in her control. She wanted me to herself, she wanted to keep me reliant on her, and she needed to keep me dependent on her in order to fulfill her narcissistic desires. But I was in a place where I was starting to break away from all of that, and I was starting to understand just how unhealthy and damaging this dynamic was. So from here, this is where things started to take on a sort of snowballing effect. As I learned how to be independent and how to take space away from Martha, I began to go about life differently and began to prioritize things that previously I hadn't prioritized because I was prioritizing how she might feel about them. One of the ways I did this was by pursuing my medical transition and starting HRT. Now, as my fellow trans people may know, this process brings up a lot of questions about your family's background and your family's medical history. When you go on HRT, there are things that you may become more susceptible to getting depending on your family's medical background. So as I was going through the process of getting myself onto HRT and starting testosterone therapy, these were things that started to come up in my treatment plan and questions that needed to be answered. Now, this is where I am going to quickly remind you guys of the trigger warnings from the beginning of this video. I will be talking in this section about mentions of SA. So if you would like to skip ahead, this is the timestamp that you can go to in order to do so. For context, as I had mentioned earlier, I grew up in a single parent household where it was just me and my mom. Now, when I was a kid, and I'm sorry, I don't know the exact age that I was at this time, but if I could guess, I would say around early teens to maybe like tween age, like just before being a teenager. But regardless of my age, there was a time during my youth when my mother sat me down and she informed me that I was the product of sexual assault. More specifically, she explained to me that she had been and date raped, and that this is the way that she became pregnant with me. Now, going back to me discussing my transition and me starting HRT, there were questions that came up about both my maternal side and my paternal side when it came to medical history. And this left me feeling as though it would be very vital and important for me to find out some information about my father. Also, I'm just being honest, I wanted to know who he was. I had not known this my entire life. I was in my 20s at this point, and I wanted to know who this man was. Now, going into this, I knew that me wanting to find out more about my father was not something that was going to convince Martha to tell me about him. So instead, I leaned on the medical side of things and the reasons why it would be medically beneficial for me. This sparked another series of angry phone calls, which, sadly for her, would eventually lead to Martha's downfall. At this point, Willy was present for every phone conversation that I ever had with Martha. This was because she is my person, she is my partner, and in this time when I was really working to try to break away from this abusive person in my life, I honestly needed my support person with me in times when I was confronting this person. Now, during these phone calls, Martha would lay into me about how awful and ugly and horrible it was for me to even ask her about this person, saying how it was just awful for me to in any way ask her to give me any details about her accused rapist. However, during one of these phone calls, when Martha was going into pretty gruesome detail about this alleged assault, Willy noticed that the account that she was giving in this phone call was different than the one that she had given just the day prior in a different phone call. Now, this is obviously very confronting information to become aware of. It's something that, no one wants to believe is the truth. To in any way insinuate that someone is lying about abuse, particularly sexual abuse, can be a very confronting thing, and it can be very challenging to even entertain that idea, no matter how valid it may be. So because of this, Willy confided in her best friend and explained some of her concerns about the situation before ultimately coming to me and talking to me about it. And I'll be honest, I did have some pushback when she confronted me about everything that she felt was going on. This was a truth that I had come to accept from a young age and that I had carried with me for years. And being met with the possibility that it wasn't true was very confronting for me. It was very worrying, very distressing, and my initial reaction to that was to say that there's no way that that could be the truth. There was no way that my mother could have lied to me about something so ugly and so horrible, and then continued to use that in such a negative way to make me feel bad about asking about my father. However, after hearing her out and having Willy explain to me what she had come to understand, what she had heard, and how it had made her come to this conclusion, I couldn't deny that her worries were pretty warranted and in a very concerning way. This is where things get weird. Martha was very clearly discussing all of what was going on with the people in her life, with her friends. Which on the surface, of course, you should be able to confide in your people and discuss things and be able to offload with your safe people in your own time. However, as time went on, it became more and more clear that the version of things that she was constantly telling other people was not the full truth of what was going on, and it was being told in a way to paint her as the victim and myself and Willy as perpetrators and attackers against her. One of these friends, who I will not name, decided to take measures into her own hands and message Willy directly. In this message, she accused Willy of not having sympathy for victims of sexual assault and ultimately just condemning her for being supportive for me and supporting my side of things throughout this entire conflict. Now, this was, needless to say, a very odd thing to have happen. This woman had, prior to this, been involved in absolutely none of this situation. She had not spoken to Willy at all. She hadn't spoken to me about the situation at all. It was just out of left field, and it was just completely uncalled for. She was delving into some very triggering things and saying things that were very explicit and just not okay for anyone to say to another person, let alone someone who was discussing a potential assault done to someone else and saying things about it to someone who they had also never met. It was just a very uncomfortable and uncalled for situation that did not need to happen at all. Needless to say, things got very ugly at this point. This woman, along with 2 other people who I also will not name, like mother, like daughter, I guess, these women had also decided to message me directly and come to me with accusations saying that I was being insensitive, saying that I was being hurtful towards my mother, saying that I was essentially being a selfish brat, and that my claims of abuse were not warranted at all. So after all of this went down and it became very overwhelmingly clear that Martha was going to be no help whatsoever when it came to finding out who my father was or finding out any sort of information about him, Willy and I decided to try to find another alternative route to finding out this information. And that's exactly what we did. After getting in contact with my father and confronting him with the story that we had been given, he was able to shed some very much needed light on this entire situation. It turned out that not only was I not the product of a one-off assault, but at the time that I was conceived, my father and my mother were actually in a long-term relationship at the time. He was not this lawless criminal person that my mother had framed him out to be as. He was actually a literal war veteran. This man was able to provide details and answer a multitude of questions that Willy and I both had that ultimately gave us a better understanding of what actually happened that led to me being conceived. As we talked, it became clear that this man was in no way the monster that Martha had painted him out to be. It had all been a lie. The reality was that, as I said, the 2 of them were in a relationship at the time that I was conceived. They had been dating, and he did admit that it wasn't a super healthy relationship and it didn't end on the best terms. However, he made it exceptionally clear that at no point did he ever enact any form of sexual or other sort of violence against Martha to any degree. In fact, after giving him the date that I was born, he was able to do some mental math and recall the situations that most likely were what led to me being conceived. And from his recollection, he made it very clear that at the time they were in a relationship. They loved each other. They, like I said, didn't have the most healthy relationship, but they were in a relationship regardless. This was not some stranger attack that my mother had explained it to me as. Now, I'm gonna need y'all to hold on to your chairs for this next part because we're gonna enter a whole new level of crazy here. After confronting Martha with the truths that we had uncovered by talking to my father, she made the biggest attempt at gaslighting that I think she had even tried to do so far in any of this. And she did this by attempting to deny ever saying that she had been assaulted in any form. Now, just to remind you, this is something that not only had she told me when I was a child, but she had also reiterated multiple times on multiple phone calls just days prior leading up to this conversation. Needless to say, this attempt was not successful. If anything, it just sort of confirmed the reality of what was going on and confirmed that she had been lying, because how do you then go and deny ever saying it in the first place? Like, it was just very, very confusing, and ultimately it was just kind of the nail in the coffin. She was digging the hole deeper for herself at that point. After I came to understand that she had lied about being assaulted, I was understandably very upset about the whole thing. Now, I'm going to pull back that trigger warning real quick to talk about my personal experiences. Now, I'm not going to delve too much into this because this isn't what this video is about, but throughout the course of my life, I have been the victim of sexual assault on more than one occasion. I have also been drugged, and this is something that I never confided in Martha about and never told her about, specifically because I believed that it would be triggering for her because of this lie that she had told to me. Now, I did explain this to Martha because I thought that maybe in all of this, explaining this situation might give her some perspective and allow her to understand just how damaging this all was. But of course, did she? No, she did not. She hardly even acknowledged me saying that to her at all. It sort of got like brushed under the rug. I didn't really get any sort of acknowledgement that I had even said anything about this. I never really even got acknowledgement from like confiding in her about this, about like anything. It just never got brought up. It was never discussed. It was never acknowledged. And that was just sort of like a slap in the face within all of this. It was just sort of like, okay, we're going to discuss how I lied about being sexually assaulted, and you're going to confide in me about how you literally were, but I'm not going to take any sort of moment to address that at all. Or better yet, to apologize to you for how distressing that undoubtedly would have been to have put a child into that situation where then as an adult, they don't feel that they can confide in their parent about being assaulted. Oh, and another thing, yeah, Martha was saying that she had never said this, that she had never said anything about being assaulted or anything to do with rape. However, if we do just a teeny tiny rewind, her friend had literally messaged Willy, and her other friends had also messaged me to tell us that we were wrong for confronting her about being sexually assaulted. So somehow, these people were aware that she had been sexually assaulted. I had been aware that she had been sexually assaulted. Willy had been aware that she had been sexually assaulted. But apparently, Martha never said this to anyone. Make it make sense. Also, another weird thing that went down in all of this was Martha somehow managed to manipulate my biological father to also side with her in all of this. Yes, you heard me right. The man that she accused of sexual assault was now on her side, stating that that was never the case, and she had never said that to me, despite not knowing me at all. He was trying to tell me that she hadn't told me that I was a product of assault, because that's what she was telling him. So this is what I would refer to as the beginning of the end with my relationship with my mother. Obviously, throughout all of this, it had become very, very strained, and it wasn't really present at all. But because of the narcissistic ways that our relationship had been built, I was still dependent on her for certain things, particularly like finances. I wasn't financially independent, and all of the emotional drain and the turmoil that had been going on in the months that this had been happening, I had been struggling to maintain a good standing with my job. I had been struggling to go to work, make money, and I had been in a very vulnerable financial situation at that point. I was also in the process of trying to cut ties with Martha. We weren't really speaking at all. I needed to take space from her. I was not allowing her to contact me. And ultimately, I was in the process of cutting her off for good. Now, in this process, something that I really felt passionate about was that I wanted to be able to get some things from my childhood home that my mother still had. Memorabilia from things that I had done and places I'd gone to and so on. Items of clothing, sentimental things, so on and so on. There were things at her house that I really wanted to be able to have, and I didn't want her to keep them. I wanted to have them for myself because I knew that the relationship that I had with her was a ticking time bomb, and I wanted to get out with as much that I could of my own life. But this isn't something that I was able to do in the end. Martha took issue with every single step of that process. She first tried to say that she didn't have any time to pack up things for me, so I offered to send someone there on my behalf as I was in another country and couldn't come do it myself. She then said that she took issue with someone else being involved and she felt embarrassed by this, which, I'll be quite frank, I didn't really care at that point how she felt about someone else being involved because she had been involving other people in this situation from day one. So that really didn't sway me at all, but regardless, that was one of her points of issue that she took with all of this. There was also a financial element to all of this in which she didn't want to put forth the finances in order to send me my things, and she made it clear that that would be something that I would have to fund on my own. Now, as I said, in all of this, I had been really struggling. This had all affected my mental health in a really negative way, and it made it hard for me to maintain my job and my life-work balance. So, needless to say, I was not in a financial position to be paying for a large shipment of things to be sent from another country to me. However, this was then something that Willy offered to help me finance. But in all of this, as you will come to understand, the issues that Martha would bring up about this situation were not the real issues that she took with it. The real issue was that she just didn't want to give me my things, because it was a way to maintain control over the situation and to keep me from cutting her off completely. Martha made it clear that no matter what I did to try to sort out the situation, I would not be getting my things back. This is when I had to make the very tough decision to let go of everything that I had at her house. This is something that still makes me emotional to this day. You know, I have art pieces that I created over the years. I have memorabilia from concerts that I went to. I have photos. I have band merch. I have so many things that have a lot of sentimental value to me, and I had to let go of that in order to free myself from this abusive person and this really unhealthy dynamic. So this is where things get a little bit weird, and you're just gonna have to stick with me. So in this process of trying to cut off all connection to my mother and cut off contact with Martha entirely, I needed to get some things in order first. One of these things included our shared iCloud. Now, for anyone who doesn't have this setup, there is a setup that you can do with Apple devices where you essentially share a iCloud account, but you still have like separate accounts for different devices, but you share certain things like app stores and different things to do with that, like iTunes and stuff like that. Now, I needed to find a way to disconnect the two of them. I didn't know exactly how to go about this, but I figured the best way would be to log in online and try to see if there was anything in the account details. So that's what I did. I logged in, and I had logged into her account because, like I said, we were connected to the same account. So it was under her own email and her own login that I needed to go in and see if I could remove myself from it. Oh boy, now this is where things get wild. Okay. How do I even begin to explain what happened here? So I logged onto the account and I attempted to go in and try to find out how to remove myself. When you log in, it kind of gives you like an overview of a lot of different apps that are connected to the iCloud. And it wasn't made very clear whose account this was, whether this was my information or Martha's information. But I was under the impression that it was my information. And so was Willy, because she was there with me doing this at the same time. So there was a point in which we were kind of going through everything and trying to figure out how to disconnect stuff. And I needed to quickly go to the toilet, so I went out of the room. And this is when Willy decided that she was just gonna kind of continue to scroll through this page and try to figure out what was going on. And she had stumbled across the Photos tab. Now, in full transparency, and Willy said this in her video as well, she was just trying to make sure that there weren't any intimate photos or anything that was sort of like of any intimate nature being shared with Martha through this sort of connected account situation. Now, turned out that this was not my account, it was Martha's, and it was her information that we were looking through, and we just hadn't come to understand that at the moment. So as Willy was going through the photos to try to see if there was anything that she needed to try to remove, she started to come across some things that ultimately made her pretty confused about sort of why certain things were seemingly in my photos or in my phone or in my account. This included screenshots of members of Willy's family, screenshots of their social profiles on things like Facebook. This was very odd, and when I came back into the room, Willy asked me about this. She was like, hey, why do you have this screenshot of my sister in your phone? Like, what's this for? And I was very confused at that point. I was like, well, I don't have a screenshot of your sister in my phone. I don't know what you're talking about. And that's when she showed me the image that she had found. This is the point when we began to realize we were not in my account, we were in Martha's account. Now, after coming to the realization that this was not my account and it was actually Martha's, and that it was her who had this weird screenshot of Willy's family member in her phone, we began to do a little bit more digging, I'm not gonna lie to you. We came across quite a few other screenshots. There were some that were of posts that Willy had made, particularly ones that stated things relating to where she was at particular times. There was also screenshots from other people, other family members, things of that nature. And overall, it was starting to become clear that Martha was cyber stalking. Another thing that we found in her phone were numbered screenshots of messages that she was sending to people or posting on Facebook that were her detailing the situation, but lying about it. She was essentially detailing things about the conflict that was going on between me and her in ways that framed her out to be a victim and framed myself and Willy as perpetrators who were attacking her. She was using social media and messages and her contact with other people to try to invalidate the truth that I was sharing online when I had started to share with you guys elements of what was going on and come clean about the abuse that I had been experiencing and all of the turmoil that had been coming up as a result of trying to get away from it. So at this point, shit had really hit the fan. There was no more hiding from Martha. There was no more lies. There was no more way to manipulate what she had really been doing. And this is when I decided that there would be absolutely no more contact, that there would be no more attempts to in any way sort of like alleviate the tension or come to any sort of conclusion to this. There was nothing that could be done, and she needed to go permanently. This is when we started to put into motion the situation in which I fled to the US to live with members of Willy's family in order to seek safety from Martha. Willy unfortunately wasn't able to travel with me at the exact same time, so then she was left vulnerable in London and having to sort of deal with the anxieties that Martha had put onto life and just the everyday. And that is something that I'm like really saddened about to this day. I wish that we could have been able to escape this fully together and just be together throughout all of it, but we did what we had to do. Despite this being something that we had to do, it was definitely not without difficulty. Willy and I were both extremely paranoid that Martha would just show up because that was something that she had offhandedly made comments about in all of this. There were a lot of anxieties about just what she could do, how she could show up, or how she could manipulate situations, how she could interfere. And especially when we were separated, we felt more vulnerable. You know, we weren't with each other. We weren't a united front. I mean, we were in the sense of we were always a united front, but we weren't physically together. And that led to there being a lot more anxiety about what Martha could or couldn't do. Thankfully, eventually, Willy was able to move to the US with me. And again, if you guys have been here for a while, you likely saw all of that take place as it was happening, because we were making some videos during that time, despite having to sort of keep a lot of things quiet, just in order to protect our own safety and privacy. But backtracking a little bit to the day that we actually found all of this out, we didn't know what else to do but to confront her about this. I mean, the cat was out the bag. She needed to answer for what was going on. There were some very concerning messages that we were seeing. There were very big lies that were being spread. And ultimately, it was just a very obvious situation that we could not avoid talking about. So I called her up and I confronted her about it. We both confronted her about it, really, and called her out. And it was not a pretty phone call. And in true avoiding nature type fashion, Martha decided to just cut off that phone call. She hung up. She refused to talk to us. She refused to be confronted by the reality that she had created, essentially, and the things that she had done. But it was very clear on our end that this was the final straw. This was the last thing that really pushed forward the necessary steps of getting her out of our life permanently. The anxieties about Martha engaging in stalking-like behavior didn't end with us moving, unfortunately. I personally had a lot of anxieties that came up when I started my first job after moving. Mind you, for a long time I had been aware that Martha was more than capable of tracking my location. So even though there were safeguarding measures put into place to make sure that this wasn't happening, I was incredibly anxious in public spaces, and particularly at my own job. I had this fear that one day Martha was just going to show up while I was at work and just demand to see me, and I would have no one there who would even understand the gravity of what's going on. Sadly, Willy and I being apart during this time only added to this anxiety, because Martha was known to take advantage of pretty much any time that Willy and I were apart to try to get in contact and try to manipulate me in some way to I don't know, forgive her or let her back in or whatever it is that she wants at this point. Remember when I told y'all that Martha's biggest fear was Willy swooping in and stealing me away from her? It's crazy how sometimes you turn out to be the thing that you feared most all along, huh? At the same time that I was having these anxieties while being back in the US, on the other side of the world, Willy was feeling these intense anxieties as well. Even though being the caring and overprotective person that she is, she didn't share a lot of these anxieties and feelings with me in the moment. And this was because she was trying to be supportive to me and not put more onto my plate. Actually, you know what? Pause. Before going further, I really want to take a minute to just give some acknowledgement to Willy and her experience in all of this. There were a lot of things that went on throughout all of this that deeply affected Willy. And regrettably, there are a lot of ways that I did not make anything easier for her. Instead, if I'm being really honest, the way that I behaved and the way that I was treating Willy during a lot of this intense and troubling time during our lives, I actually did more harm than good in these moments. And I just want to say that Willy should never have been made to deal with any of this, but let alone dealing with all of this and also having a partner who wasn't making it any easier and giving them support back in the same way that she was giving support to me. You know, breaking off from a narcissistic parent and learning how to identify narcissistic behavior can ultimately expose your own narcissism in the way that you've learned how to act. It's not fun, it's very daunting, it's upsetting and confronting, but it's the truth. And the ugly truth of it is that my learned narcissism was something that I displayed in some of the worst ways during a really difficult time in both of our lives. Also, can I just say that the Willy I know today would have never let me get away with any of the BS that I was doing and putting her through during that time. We have both learned how to identify and stop accepting narcissistic behavior from anyone. And I just want to quickly give her flowers because she has grown in all of this in an abundance of ways, and I'm very proud of her for the journey that she's gone on and where she is today. Needless to say, by this point, it was painfully obvious that I needed to work on my own narcissism. That is an ongoing journey that I honestly am still on to this day. I don't really believe that this is something that you can really heal from instantly or that you can just easily get through and get over. There's a lot of things that need to be relearned and a lot of things that need to be adjusted in just the way that I am able to go about things. And honestly, one of the biggest pieces in all of this is being intentional with everything I do and remembering to practice conscious mindfulness in all aspects of life. Over the past year, Willy and I have both been working on our own individual and joint healing from all of this and reshifting to put our energy back into building the life that we plan to share together. Ultimately, we're just focusing on moving forward rather than continuing to be dragged down by the past. Martha no longer has any way to contact either of us or anyone that we know, and we are both actively healing from the emotional and mental effects that all of this has had on us both. Honestly, that's a part of why I'm making this video, is in hopes that doing so allows me to sort of close this chapter, and so that I can move forward into Willy and I's future without carrying the weight of everything that I've been holding in all of this time. If you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching. You don't know how much it means to me that you even care to listen to me ramble on about this kind of stuff. I know that this was not a super fun video and it was a heavier one, so please do watch something lighthearted or put on some fun music or have a bubble bath, do something to decompress if this left you feeling a bit heavy today. I want to also thank all of you guys for being here, especially those of you who have been here throughout all of that time that I've been talking about during this video. The Rebel Army is strong and powerful, and you guys have just been a godsend. Genuinely, you guys have been so lovely and so supportive, and you have done so much for me and Willy that I don't think any of y'all could really understand what you guys have done for us. The support and the love that you guys show us and have shown us has kept us going. It has motivated us. It has comforted us. There are so many ways that you guys have been there for us, and we just really both appreciate it, and I just want to take this moment to thank you guys. All right, y'all, that is the last time. I'm calling it the last time. I'm not even gonna say her name again. It's the last time it's ever coming out my mouth. We're done. We're done. All right, you guys, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please go and click that subscribe button and make sure you click that bell so you don't miss out on any new uploads from myself or my amazing partner, Willy. All right, you guys, you know what time it is. Remember, drink water, eat carrots, and Willy will see you in the next one. Mwah! Goodbye.